On today's API review, we're going to be looking at Ploi. Let's dive in and see how good that API is. So who are Ploi? Ploi are a server management provider that allow you to manage your servers across people like AWS, DigitalOcean, Hertzner, and more. They give you an easy to use control panel to allow you to manage creating, deploying, and maintaining your servers and applications easily and efficiently. Ploi's documentation is clean and easy to navigate. It tells you everything you need to know, everything is easy to find, and it's got a really great getting started section. It really explains the error and status codes that it's going to use or that you could receive, which is fantastic. It tells you if you receive a 200, everything is good and nothing has failed. If you receive a 201, we've created the object that you asked us to do. 422, validation for parameters have failed. 429, too many attempts. 500, an internal server error has occurred and we will be notified about this. 503, we're doing some maintenance. That level of information in your documentation is great because it allows you as a developer to understand the status codes, what's happened, why, what are they doing about it, and how can I respond and how can I work with that information. One thing I love that I haven't seen anywhere else, they have a specific endpoint for Teapot. If you go to ploi.io/API/Teapot, not only will you receive a 418 I'm a Teapot response, but you receive a message that says, say hi to the Teapot. Let's start with an endpoint. We're going to look at the servers listing page, which is API/servers. The example request there is in a curl request, and it gives you the example response. So let's have a look at the response. We've got three top level keys. We've got data, which is where the data from the response is going to mainly sit. You've got links, so you can go to the first and last page. And then you've got meta, so you can see how many servers there are and how many are on each page. Let's look at the content itself. We've got an ID, a type, a name, PHP version, status ID, and a created app. Somewhat basic representation of the data itself. I would maybe like to see a little bit more embedding within there, maybe grouping things a bit more specifically so it's less of a kind of a database output and more of an API response. Now let's walk through creating a server. So we've got a post request to API servers, which is good. It tells you which scopes are required on your token, which is a really nice addition. It says to do it properly, you need three key values. You need a plan, a region, and the credential. So the plan is a plan ID to install the server with, and that reflects back to your server provider, whether that's DigitalOcean or AWS or whoever that might be. The region is where you want to install the server, and the credential is which server provider that you've got configured on your account already. So you can install multiple providers and deploy specific servers on specific providers through the API, which is a really nice feature. If we have a look at the example request in curl, you can see that it's authorizing, it's got content type. The accept response coming back is set to be JSON, and the payload being sent over is relatively straightforward. The response that comes back uses the proper status code of 201 created. It will give you back that information in JSON, and it will give you the server that has just been created for you. Because it's not being built in the background, it is registering it, and then background workers focus on actually building that out. It gives you the information you need to move forward. So now let's look at deleting a server. we can send a delete request to API/servers/server identifier, which requires a scope delete servers. Again, I really like how fine-grained these tokens are. The example request given is a curl request like all of the others, and it just shows you how to send a delete request using curl. The response that comes back is quite nice. It gives you that server that you just requested to delete back, but you can see that the status has changed. It changes the status to destroying because it's not destroyed straight away. It's nice that it's got an error block right at the bottom of the documentation there, because it's an error that you might encounter. For example, the server is already being destroyed, so you can't re-request the server to be destroyed if you've already requested it. As usual, let's upload the spec to API Insights. If you click on this box, you'll see that we calculate scores based on an A to F, which equates back to a percentage. The higher, the better. So if we have a look at the report for Ploi, we'll see that we got an F for design, a B for performance, and an F for security. It is a good API, but let's dive into the details to find out what's causing these scores. If we look at design, we'll see that we're failing on versioning, consistent pluralization, rate limiting, and robust responses. Now, if we remember back to the API documentation itself, we'll see that there is consistent pluralization, there is some rate limiting, and there are robust responses. However, they're not available within the specification themselves. It doesn't version. If we remember back to the documentation, Ploi aren't using API versioning, but API versioning is a little bit like Marmite. You either love it or you hate it. In their situation, I'd say that they don't need API versioning, so I'd say that they don't really fail this test. Consistent pluralization. This is very much an action-based API, so what you've got to bear in mind is that while we're scoring based on best practices, it is more important for you to build an API that is good for your use case. And their use case means it is action-based, so pluralization is probably not needed. Rate limiting is not apparent in the Open API specification, however it is documented. So that is more of a documentation error than an API issue. And the robust responses is much the same. So now let's look at the performance. We've got a B for performance. It is a good score. The only thing that they aren't doing is supporting compression, or we cannot detect any compression support requirement. As usual, we aren't able to give any sort of response size, so it is a skipped test. That is because you need something more than just a spec analyzer and an API analyzer. You need to actually be in that API to understand the average response size itself, which is why we recommend to use our product, Treblle. Now, security. This is a very common thing that I'm seeing in APIs that I check. They authorize all of the requests, and in fact, Ploi has got one of the best authorization models that I've seen with the fine-grained token permissions. And obviously, it's using secure URLs, but it is missing the optional security headers that you could add to your API just to harden it that much further. Now, if we scroll back up to the top, what we're going to do is look at downloading the report, because these reports are useful to look back on and compare against as time goes on. As always, I like to share my report into my notes so that I've got it back later if I should need it. Overall, I'd say that Ploi have got a very good API. The API spec could do with some updating and aligning with their documentation. And I think if that were the case, we would be seeing Bs across the board, if not better. Ploi is one of the better APIs that I've seen, and I would 100% say that it is approved by Steve. Remember, if you want to check how good your API is, you can visit apiinsights.io or search for Mac Store for API Insights and see how good your API is.